Monster Guys present a Yokai podcast presentation, bringing to life, through short stories and informative discussion, the strange, the beautiful, the whimsical, and the mystery of Japanese yokai.
Now please enjoy a story about
the Katawaguruma and the nyūdō, in a story titled A Burning Fate, written and narrated by C. Michael McGannon, presented by the Monster Guys. Fools! Scum! Warmongers! Lecherous souls! The screams echoed along the roads, bouncing loudly off the walls of the houses locked and barred. Ahsoka gathered her children close as the woman's voice screeched right outside their door. Miserable wretches! Come out! Come out! Their door shivered and shook, the light of the fire shimmering through the cracks. Don't look! Hissed Ahsoka, covering the eyes of her son and daughter and pulling her own eyes to the floor. The demon had haunted their town for a day now, her wails increasing in pitch and desperate hate. It was not the first time these poor people had dealt with such a monster either. For years, at random intervals, similar spirits had come to this area. Fiery things, wailing and shouting and hissing threats. Anyone who dared to look upon the creatures were taken, either by a host of hot, smoldering chains, or a mouth of chipped, yellow teeth, and dragged from this world to the next. These creatures, whatever they were, seemed not to be picky of the poor souls they stole away. The first to face his fate had been a man 2 towns away from Ahsoka's. He was a loud and obnoxious man, well known for coercing others into giving him money or resources from their lands. A scoundrel, a criminal of the most ireful ilk, used to ramming his way through life unchallenged. The man had gone to see who was screaming in rage down the street one day. Word from that town spread quickly. Some sort of demonic circle wreathed in fire had been seen carrying away the obnoxious man, while he screamed in pain from the chains that burned into his flesh. Remember him, parents had told their children for months to come. He was cruel in life, and Lord Enma sent his servants to bring him to hell accordingly. However, the next year, when a similar shouting and screaming was heard in the streets, a young mother chanced to look out her window and spied the beast. A foul head, suspended within a cart's wheel, and burning with unnatural fire. The monstrous thing screamed at the young woman. How dare you look at me? You should be watching your child instead.
Filled with dread, the woman looked to where her daughter had been cowering moments before. The girl was suddenly disappeared. When the mother looked back, her daughter hung by the neck in the creature's blistered mouth. Before any action could be taken, the monster that would come to be known as nyūdō was gone, having taken the daughter to the hellish realm of Jigoku. The spirit was no respecter of persons. The next event was months later, an old fisherman in the wrong place at the wrong time. And after that, weeks later, a monk had been carried away in such a gruesome fashion that people still shuddered to think of it, and even more so refused to talk about it. It did seem that these demonic, so-called wheel priests tended to be drawn toward those who are corrupt or cruel, but it was not so often the case, and as such could not be relied on so as to comfort those who heard the sudden screaming and yelling of the nyūdō. Now, in Ahsoka's town, a similar event was happening. This was not the first time, but knowing well the way these events always turned out, no one left their houses or dared to peek out their windows. They would wait for the spirit to leave, fearful as the waiting may be. No one wished to be ripped away by hot chains to face Lord Enma prematurely, choosing instead to hole up in their homes, staying well away from the doors and windows. "Mommy," asked Hana, Ahsoka's daughter, that night as the monster continued its wailing well beyond the sun's setting. "Yes, my tiny blossom? What does the monster want?" This simple question stopped Ahsoka in her tracks. "I am not sure. Now run along, be sure your brother is ready for sleep." "Yes, mother." What did this calamity want? Why was it here, in their small town no less? Ahsoka had never asked these questions. She had only waited in fear, as did everyone else. But as the 5th day and night crept by, The abysmal creature was still wandering their tiny streets. The questions burned in Ahsoka's mind. They could not wait forever.
"Look not on me,"
cried the thing outside the door.
"Cower, you fools! Stay in, that's right, that's right."
True, news and goods traveled in and out of this town, but not often. They were simple folk who had to work the land. Hiding away as they did was slowly killing their livestock and their crops, and surely would kill them too. By the 6th day, Ahsoka realized that, just as she, the rest of the town's community must be waiting for some poor merchant or traveling monk to wander in and appease the monster. There was no guarantee when that would be. By night 7, Ahsoka was growing desperate. She tried calling out to her closest neighbors, but the demon was there before she could speak more than a name. Quickly, she shielded her eyes as it screamed at her from the other side of her closed window.
"Fool, there is no help, no help."
2 days later, they were running out of supplies. Ahsoka knew her children would starve if nothing was done, and she thought she finally understood what the burning spirit wanted. In all of the other stories, these things had left as soon as they had captured someone. Ahsoka kissed her children on their heads, grasping their shoulders in fear. "Wait here. No matter what you hear, don't come out. Call for help, but don't look outside. Do you understand?" Both of her children nodded, tears slipping down Hana's cheeks. "Mama, don't go out there." Having no words, hungry and exhausted, and not knowing the fate that awaited her, Ahsoka merely drew her children close with one final hug, then released them from her embrace. She walked to the door, taking in a deep breath, her fingers shaking as she pushed it aside. Her eyes were closed. She didn't know for sure what would happen to her now, but she wanted to put distance between her and her house. Whatever happened next, she didn't want her children to hear it. After only a few paces, though, she could hear it, feel it, smell it. The crackle of fire, the creak and whine of burning wood. Scorched hair and flesh invaded Ahsoka's nostrils, making her gag. She opened her eyes and turned around. Before her, the large wheel hovered above the ground, just like the stories had said. However, instead of a bloody head in the middle of the wheel, a woman clung to the axle of the wheel, which jutted into the air and defied gravity. The burns of the woman's skin were always searing and smoking, but never spreading. Her fingers, some tipped with broken fingernails, held on to the wheel and its axle as if they were the only things keeping her alive, and a miserable scowl was carved across her pained features.
"Fool!"
cried the spirit before Ahsoka.
"You should not have looked upon me."
She reached forward, but Ahsoka held up a hand and spoke. "I know what it is you want. Take me away and leave these people alone. Never come to this town again." A look of surprise crossed the woman's face, and Ahsoka watched as the flames caught in the hair above her forehead, scorching and immediately healing again.
"You would demand such of me, a servant of the great Lord Enma?"
Ahsoka nodded, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks, and spread her arms wide. The creature laughed loud, and chains flew from an unseen place among the flames, wrapping themselves around Ahsoka's arms and legs. The metal burned, quickly melting into her skin and causing the poor woman to scream. The wheel began to turn, dragging Ahsoka forward through the street. The pace was slow, enough for Ahsoka to try and scramble to keep up through the pain of the chains, but it grew quicker every second.
"You would offer yourself for all of these people?"
Ahsoka gasped, the white flash of agony making it hard to think or speak. She nodded her head, forcing herself to look into the spirit's tormented eyes. The spirit snarled, spinning her wheel faster until Ahsoka tripped and was dragged along the ground. They left the town behind, the street turning into rough, rocky ground, which quickly shredded Ahsoka's simple clothing and started its work on her skin. The spirit leaned forward and possibly on her axle, her face inches from Ahsoka's as the poor woman's skin began to catch fire.
"Knowing such pain now, do you regret your decision?"
Ahsoka remembered her children, her heart weeping. "No," she managed to scream through her tears. "Better me than others. Better me than my children." The spirit rose upon her wheel with scorn.
Be thankful that it is I that you met, and not another, for I am a merciful servant of Enma."
Suddenly, Ahsoka found herself in town once more, still wailing in pain, tears flowing onto her clothing as she stood in front of the spirit. After a moment, Ahsoka's mind began to try and comprehend what had just happened. She looked over her arms and legs, her clothing, finding small, pink scars where the chains had been, but no wounds, no burnt flesh, or torn skin. She looked up and around at the village, afraid for her children.
"Do not worry, they are safe,"
muttered the spirit.
"Never again look upon one like me. The next time you may not be so fortunate."
And with that, the burning spirit turned on her axle and sped away, not wailing or screaming, but silent as the grave. Ahsoka ran to her house, burst through the door, and found her children crying quietly on the floor. She rushed to them and gathered them in her arms, grateful to be alive.
Michael, that's kind of a disturbing story about the Katawaguruma and the nyūdō, and I hope I'm saying those effectively, but but it's kind of a terrifying story. And both of these yokai, though they're not both mentioned specifically by name in the story, kind of have the same story. I think one of the biggest differences, or a couple of the bigger differences between the two, is one's male, one's female, and one is a wheel priest, whereas the other one is a woman in a wheel. One tends to be historically more merciful than the other, but essentially they're the same story.
Yeah, they're the stories for these guys, the formulas of those stories are almost identical, but like you said, the Katawaguruma, which is the woman that rides the axle of the wheel, as opposed to the head, the priest's head inside a wheel, she has the capacity to be merciful. She isn't always merciful, but she has that possibility within her, whereas the nyūdō, or the wheel priest, he's never merciful whatsoever, and very often he's very gruesome. The story that I remember reading about him first, actually on Matthew Meyer's Yokai website, basically very similar to this. A woman looks outside her window when she hears him going down the street and yelling and screaming, and he says, "Instead of looking at me, you should have been watching your child." And she looks back, and her infant child is on the floor, and his legs have been ripped off. And when she looks back, it's, those legs are in his mouth. So
always good for Saturday morning family viewing material.
Yeah, which it kind of struck me. I didn't see anything about specifically, I didn't see anybody saying specifically that these were boogeyman monsters that, parents used to scare their kids, but it seems like these stories usually target the kids in the family. Like, whoever looks at them, it seems to target the rest of the family, not just them. So it almost sounds like, be good, stay inside, don't look out the window when somebody's yelling and screaming, because something might happen to you that's bad.
But at the same time, the stories of these yokai kind of tend to describe a belief system with regards to hell.
Yeah, these two yokai specifically are servants of hell, or servants specifically of Lord Enma.
Lord Enma, and what people would consider the traditional visions of hell with Jigoku.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me, because Enma is known as being the guy who kind of judges and damns spirits after their life for the Japanese version of hell, but he actually has a very compassionate side, and his wish is to save everybody before they're damned to hell. So that he has these spirits going around and kind of searching for people and picking up people that aren't always guilty per se, it's a strange contradiction to me, and I don't fully understand them, but who fully understands any yokai?
Yeah, and truly, I mean, even on a much broader scale spiritually, who ever really understands the concepts of hell and damnation? So,
and especially when you throw Renaissance paintings in there.
Yeah, no doubt. Oh my gosh, yeah. So in this story, particularly though, that you wrote, again, I'll mention that both yokai are mentioned by description, but not necessarily by name. We do see both visions, the one of the head floating with the wheel, the cart wheel, and we see the woman who is wheeling around grasping the axles. But I believe only one is mentioned by name, but I think it's important to remember that both of these yokai, you mentioned both of them in the story, they both hold an almost identical story and an almost identical purpose, just slight differences between the two.
I kind of did that on purpose, to step back from the folklore and talk a little bit more about the story for a second. Most of the yokai, maybe not most, but a lot of yokai are bizarre, and they're mostly known for just bringing fear. So you might see, a headless woman walking around, or a woman with a long neck floating through town or something, but for most of those stories, they don't cause a whole lot of harm. They may cause feverish sickness or something like that, or bad dreams or something like that, but these are specific types of harm and kidnapping and so on and so forth. So I was trying to think back then, how would people tell the stories about these creatures? Because to look upon one is to bring disaster and curse to your home. So I don't think you would have sightings about these guys as much as you would of something else. And even if you do, I don't think the stories are going to be spoken of as openly as other yokai would be. So my intention with the story was to kind of go deeper into the mind of somebody who hasn't really, they don't know much about this monster that they're facing or about to face. So all Ahsoka in the story really has to go on is what she's heard about in other towns.
I don't know. I think it's even a little bit deeper than that, though, because you're, like with a lot of yokai stories or Japanese fairy tales, there isn't always necessarily a redeeming value to the story. It's a story for the sake of being a story, for entertainment. Sometimes it's a warning, sometimes it's not. I believe this one, though, you told the story in such a way that you kind of dug deep into her character. This is a woman who may or may not have known much about the creatures. She knows what was going on in the surrounding towns. She believed that ultimately they were just looking for a soul to capture. I think, though, we dig a little bit deeper into the human condition, and specifically into a mother's heart here who says, regardless of the consequences, I'm going to take care of my kids. I'm going to take care of my family. I'm going to do whatever is necessary. So in this particular story, I think there is a redeeming value. And I think what begins as a very sad tale and one that could go very wrong in the eyes of humanity turns out to be pretty good.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, sure.
Obviously, if she had met the nyūdō, it would have been a very different story.
Yeah, very, very ugly situation.
As the Katawaguruma says at the end there, be grateful that you looked upon me and not somebody else like me. Because even if she had met another Katawaguruma, there was no guarantee that, she would have come back from that.
Right, and the implication was that there was still no guarantee even if it was her again.
Yeah.
But I believe there was something there in that human heart, that human soul that changed the fate.
Yeah, and it came to mind as I was writing it as well that maybe the Katawaguruma was a little bit jealous of this woman. As they're rolling along and screaming and causing fear and pain, it's described that these yokai are actually tortured themselves. They're feeling the fire and the flames and everything, and they're not comfy. In fact, the nyūdō enjoys the pain he delves out because he himself is in so much pain. So I feel like the Katawaguruma gave Ahsoka the glimpse into what she was feeling, and Ahsoka bore that pain, and I think it touched the heart of that yokai, if the yokai has a heart.
Yeah, and if they can be touched, I guess she did it.
Yeah.
Interesting point, though, and we might have to dig a little deep into our martial arts history here, but the Katawaguruma is actually a judo throw. It's the name of a judo throw, and I believe it's ascribed to Funakoshi, historically, who was great friends with the founder of judo, but that term or that name is actually the name of a judo throw. Mm-hmm. And you were telling me a little bit about the definition of that, and if you go look it up, if you watch the throw, it makes a lot of sense.
It does. So nyūdō, I think I said this earlier, means wheel priest. And
wheel priest, yep.
Katawaguruma means crippled wheel.
Right.
If you watch the throw, it does make perfect sense, because basically what you do is you reach down and you grab a person's leg and you kind of bend that leg so that they don't have their foundation. And then, like with many judo throws, you use the momentum against them. But it's a very pretty throw because the way you're using this, you're literally throwing them like a wheel parallel to yourself. So you grab the leg and then you toss them so that their leg goes way over their head in this beautiful wheel flurry of motion.
Yeah.
When you read the name and then when you watch that move, it does look like a crippled wheel. So it makes sense.
Yeah, which in my opinion, most all of judo is a very beautiful thing to watch, especially if you know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
Our background is in traditional Okinawan karate. We have had some judo training, but any of judo, the throws and the movements are beautiful to watch. But this yokai, not so beautiful.
No, not at all.
But it does make sense, the correlation between the two.
Yeah, I got to say, though, it made it very difficult to look up. Because, again, looking at yokai.com, Matthew Meyer's website, it's easy to find the translation and stuff. But I was trying to dig a little bit deeper and break that word down. And when you try searching some of those terms of breaking that word down, I just got a bunch of different judo throws.
Yeah.
So it was a little hard to get past that.
Yeah, and by the way, you've mentioned it a couple times, a great resource, listeners, for you to check out is yokai.com. Matthew Meyer is a wonderful artist, a yokai artist and author. He has several books about yokai available. I think you can go to Amazon.com or other places and get his books. But go to yokai.com, check him out, check out his Patreon page. Matthew has given us permission to utilize his artwork for our episodes on the Yokai podcast. So we're very grateful for that. And so we encourage you, if you want to go deeper with the study of a lot of the different yokai that we talk about, he's got a lot of details there on his website. He doesn't know that we're going to say this. He never does. He doesn't ask us to do all this, but we're very appreciative of Matthew and his willingness to spread the good news of yokai.
Yeah.
And
the education of it.
Yeah, and so we want to return some of that to him. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this story this week and being thrown a little bit around on the mat with some judo in our yokai tale. As always, you can find us at themonsterguys.com. Please talk to us on Twitter, on Facebook. Check out some of our photos on Instagram. We like to hang out with you guys online. There's a lot of activity going on, especially at Twitter and Instagram these days. So check it out. We've got a lot of good news and a lot of good things coming up, and we appreciate you giving us the opportunity to share stories with you each and every week. Until next time, if you hear screams outside your window, just keep the windows closed. Good night, everyone.
I mean, I kind of do that already.
Yeah.
Good night, guys.